On my 70th birthday, my daughter-in-law raised a toast to the old lady who's heading to a nursing home soon. The whole family laughed. Her words sliced through me like a knife. I sat there at the long dining table, surrounded by my son, my grandchildren, and relatives who should have known better, yet not one of them spoke up. Instead, the room filled with laughter, as though my dignity was a cheap joke they could all enjoy. I smiled faintly, trying to hide the sting, but inside, I felt like I was shrinking into the chair. 70 years. 70 years of sacrifice, hard work, and loyalty to my family. And that was how they chose to honor me, by treating me as a burden. Someone whose only destination left in life was a sterile room in a nursing home. My daughter-in-law's smirk said it all. She saw me as disposable, an old piece of furniture taking up too much space in her carefully curated life. I looked at my son, hoping for even the smallest sign of defense, but he just laughed nervously, raising his glass alongside hers. My heart sank. In that moment, I realized I was completely alone in that house. Not one of them saw the woman who had built this family from the ground up. Not one of them cared about the years I had given, or the love I had poured into them. I sat silently, swallowing my pain, but something inside me shifted. Their laughter rang in my ears, but instead of breaking me, it sparked a fire I thought had long burned out. I told myself, tomorrow, they will regret this. I barely slept that night after the party. Their laughter echoed in my ears as though the walls themselves wanted to mock me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering all the years that had brought me to this point. The irony was almost unbearable. Everything they took for granted, the house, the savings, the comfortable lives they led, was built from the sweat and tears of my husband and me. And now, they dared to reduce me to a punchline. I met my husband when I was only 19. He was a kind, hard-working man who believed in building a future from scratch. We didn't come from wealth, but together, we built something solid. We worked day and night, saving every penny, buying our first modest house, and slowly investing in land and businesses. There were years of hardship, of going without new clothes or vacations, just to make sure our son had everything he needed. My husband often reminded me that sacrifice was the foundation of love, and I believed him with all my heart. When our son was born, my world revolved around him. Every scraped knee, every school project, every late-night fever, I was there. I made sure he never went to bed hungry, never walked to school without a clean shirt, never felt unloved. My husband and I pushed ourselves so he could attend the best schools. When he went to college, I cried with pride, knowing our sacrifices had paid off. We thought he would carry our values with him into adulthood. But then came marriage. At first, I welcomed my daughter-in-law with open arms. I treated her like a daughter, helped her adjust, even taught her family recipes. I hoped she would be my companion in my old age, someone to lean on when loneliness crept in. But over the years, her tone shifted. Little remarks at dinner, rolling eyes when I spoke, sighs when I moved slowly across the room. She had a way of making me feel invisible, as if my very presence was an inconvenience. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself I was being sensitive, but her contempt grew bolder. She would rearrange my belongings without asking, claim the best seat at the table I once considered mine, and speak about me as if I wasn't even there. "She's getting too forgetful," she'd say, or, "It's only a matter of time before we'll need to take care of her." The sting of those words cut deeper than any physical wound. My son, once my pride and joy, began to echo her sentiments. At first, he would hush her, telling her to respect me, but as time passed, he stopped defending me. Perhaps it was easier for him to keep the peace. Perhaps he didn't want to admit that he was siding with his wife against his own mother. Whatever the reason, his silence was worse than her insults. A daughter-in-law can be cruel, but a son's indifference is what breaks a mother's heart. I found myself retreating more and more into silence, hiding my pain behind forced smiles. In family gatherings, I sat quietly, listening to them talk about vacations, investments, and plans for the future, plans that never seemed to include me. I was like a ghost haunting my own home, tolerated but never valued. What they didn't know, what they could never have guessed, was that I was not powerless. My husband and I had made sure of that long ago. When he passed away, I was left with everything we had worked for: the house, the land, the accounts. My son assumed it all belonged to him by default, that I was merely holding it in trust until he and his wife could claim it. But the truth was, the law said otherwise. Everything was mine to decide. For years, I hadn't given much thought to what I would do with it all. I assumed, as most mothers do, that it would eventually pass to my child. But as I lay awake that night, humiliated by their cruel toast, something hardened in me. Why should I reward such ungratefulness? Why should their sneers and mockery go unpunished? I thought back to the times when neighbors came to me for help, when I secretly paid for a widow's groceries or donated quietly to the local church fund. Those moments gave me a sense of purpose, a feeling of worth far greater than the shallow approval of my family. If I could use what I had to help others, why not? Why not take back my dignity by ensuring that my life's work didn't end up in the greedy hands of people who only saw me as a burden? The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table sipping coffee, watching the sunrise, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange calm. Their laughter still hurt, but it no longer had the power to crush me. Instead, it fueled me. I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could continue to fade into the background, enduring their cruelty until my final breath, or I could make a choice that would echo long after I was gone. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time, the office of an old friend who happened to be a lawyer. He answered warmly, surprised to hear from me, and after a few moments of small talk, I said, "I need to update my will. Oliver." There was silence on his end, then a simple, "Of course. Come by tomorrow." As I hung up, I felt something ignite inside me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was resolve. They thought they had silenced me with their laughter, but they had no idea. The fire inside me had only just begun to burn. The following day, I dressed carefully, putting on the navy coat my husband had always loved on me. It wasn't vanity that guided me. It was symbolism. I wanted to feel strong, dignified, and in control. As I buttoned the coat and slipped on my shoes, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't just see an old woman. I saw someone ready to take back her life. When I arrived at my lawyer's office, he greeted me warmly. "It's been too long," he said, ushering me into his office lined with oak shelves and framed certificates. I sat across from him, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "I want to make changes to my will," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He leaned back slightly, studying me. "Of course. What kind of changes?" I took a deep breath, then spoke the words that sealed my resolve. "I want to leave everything to charity. All of it." His brows rose slightly. "All of it? Not to your son?" I shook my head. "Number. My son and his wife have shown me nothing but disdain. My wealth would only fuel their arrogance. I would rather it go to children who truly need it, or to a cause that will carry forward something good." There was a long pause. I thought he might argue, remind me of tradition, or caution me to think it over. But instead, he nodded slowly. "Then that is exactly what we will do." End quote. As we went through the paperwork, I felt both heavy and light at once. Signing my name to those documents was like chiseling a monument to my own dignity. Each stroke of the pen declared that I refused to be belittled, that I refused to let cruelty have the last word. Still, a part of me hesitated. Memories of my son's childhood flashed before me, his laughter when he played in the backyard, the way he clung to me when he was scared, the pride in his eyes when he graduated. He had not always been this man who stood silently beside his mocking wife. Somewhere deep inside him was the boy I had loved so fiercely. For a moment, my hand trembled. "Are you certain?" my lawyer asked gently, noticing my hesitation. "Yes," I said, my voice sharper this time. "I gave him my love, my sacrifices, my years. That was his inheritance. What he has given me in return does not deserve another reward." He nodded again, and the papers were finalized. When I left his office, I felt taller than when I had entered. The cold winter air bit at my cheeks, but it only invigorated me. For the first time in a long while, I was no longer drifting. I had a plan, and it was mine alone. Over the next few days, I carried myself with an unusual calm. My daughter-in-law continued her petty remarks, criticizing how I folded the laundry, scoffing when I forgot where I left my reading glasses. My son remained indifferent, scrolling on his phone, pretending not to hear. But none of it touched me anymore. If anything, their cruelty only confirmed that I had made the right choice. They thought I was powerless, but I held the greatest power of all: choice. My decision would shape not only their future, but also the lives of countless strangers who might one day benefit from my husband's and my sacrifices. The thought gave me strength. At night, I sat alone in my room, reading brochures from different charities and foundations: a children's hospital, a scholarship fund, a shelter for women escaping violence. Each story moved me deeply. These were people who knew real suffering, people who could transform a gift into hope. I realized then that I wasn't just taking something away from my son and his wife, I was giving something priceless to others. One evening, I caught my daughter-in-law whispering to my son in the kitchen. "When she goes, we'll finally be free," she said, her tone dripping with anticipation. "Think of what we can do with the house. We could sell it, buy something modern. We'll never have to worry about money again." I froze in the hallway, unseen, my heart pounding. My son chuckled softly in response, not once correcting her, not once defending me. Any lingering doubt I had evaporated in that instant. I was doing the right thing. The cruelty of their laughter on my birthday had sparked the fire, but this moment poured gasoline on it. They were waiting for me to die, as if I were an obstacle between them and their fortune. What they didn't know was that their imagined treasure chest was already gone. Every last coin, every acre of land, every investment, it no longer belonged to them. The thought made me smile to myself in the dark hallway. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of triumph. Let them laugh now. Let them whisper. Soon enough, their smug certainty would crumble, and I would be the one watching in silence as their world collapsed. The days following my visit to the lawyer unfolded like a strange play in which I was both actor and audience. Outwardly, I went about my routine, cooking small meals for myself, watering the plants in the sunroom, knitting quietly in the evenings. Inwardly, I was alive with a sense of anticipation. Every word exchanged around me, every careless remark my daughter-in-law made, only reminded me of the secret I now carried. She grew bolder, too, as if my birthday toast had unlocked a new level of cruelty. One morning, as I sat at the breakfast table sipping tea, she announced, "We really should start thinking about renovations once the house is ours. Maybe knock down these old walls and get rid of that dreadful wallpaper." She waved a dismissive hand at the floral print I had chosen decades ago, back when my husband was alive and we had celebrated our first Christmas here. My son gave a non-committal grunt, but I noticed the way his eyes darted toward me. He didn't stop her, didn't tell her to show some respect. He simply let her words hang in the air. I smiled faintly, forcing myself to keep calm. Let them dream. Later that afternoon, I overheard her speaking to a friend on the phone. "Once she's gone, we'll be set. The accounts, the land, the house, it'll all be ours. We won't have to worry about money ever again." Her laughter was sharp, grating, filled with greedy delight. I sat quietly in my room, hands folded in my lap, listening to her arrogance seep through the thin walls. She had no idea that the future she boasted about had already been erased with the stroke of a pen. In public, I played my part perfectly. At Sunday dinner, when relatives visited, I smiled politely, passed the dishes, and even chuckled at their jokes. To them, I appeared like the same old woman, fading into the background. But inside, I was a fortress. My silence was no longer weakness. It was strategy. The more invisible they thought I was, the greater the impact of my revelation would be. Still, there were moments when the weight of it pressed heavily on me. At night, I lay awake, wondering if I was too harsh. Was it cruel to leave my son with nothing, after all the years I had devoted to raising him? But then I remembered his laughter at my expense, his silence when his wife humiliated me. That memory steeled my resolve. Love without respect is a hollow thing, and he had made his choice. I began to take pleasure in small details, subtle acts of defiance they didn't even notice. When my daughter-in-law boasted about her future plans for our money, I would sip my tea slowly, savoring the taste of victory only I understood. When my son mentioned how secure their future was, I would nod gently, hiding the knowledge that their security was nothing but smoke. One evening, my granddaughter sat beside me on the couch, showing me her drawings from school. She was too young to understand the tension swirling in the household. Her innocence warmed me, and I felt a pang of regret that my actions might someday affect her indirectly. But I reminded myself, children learn from the examples of their parents. If her mother chose greed and cruelty, perhaps losing what she expected would be the lesson she needed most. As the weeks passed, whispers about my health circulated more openly. My daughter-in-law remarked to a neighbor, within earshot, "She's slowing down so much. Honestly, it's a matter of time." They spoke of me as though I were already gone, as if my presence were nothing more than a shadow lingering until the inevitable. I nodded and smiled, letting them believe what they wished. Little did they know that every day brought them closer not to their triumph, but to their downfall. The tension built like the tightening of a string. Every dinner, every exchange, felt like a rehearsal for the grand moment to come. My daughter-in-law's smugness was almost unbearable, yet I endured it with quiet satisfaction. I had something far more powerful than her sharp tongue, or my son's cowardly silence. I had control of the one thing they valued above all else, the fortune they were certain would be theirs. I spent my evenings going through old photographs, sorting them into boxes. Each picture was a reminder of the life my husband and I had built, the picnics in the park, the holidays spent laughing, the milestones we achieved. I kept these memories close, not for my son or his wife, but for myself. They were proof that my life had meaning beyond the ridicule I now faced. And soon, that meaning would extend to others through the charity I had chosen. The decision felt less like revenge and more like liberation. I was not merely punishing them. I was reclaiming the power they thought they had stripped from me. By giving my wealth to strangers in need, I was ensuring that my life's work would not be tainted by their greed. That, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all. On the surface, life in the house went on as usual. My daughter-in-law made plans, my son followed her lead, and I remained quiet. But beneath the calm surface, the storm was gathering. Papers had been signed, decisions finalized, and the trap was set. They laughed, they mocked, they planned, and I waited, patient as stone. For soon, the moment would come when their illusions shattered, and the silence they once used against me would be returned in full measure. Only this time, it would be my silence and their shame. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, almost deceptively. It was a Saturday afternoon, and my daughter-in-law had arranged for the family to gather in the living room. She said it was to discuss the future, though I knew she really meant to parade her sense of ownership in front of everyone. She wore a bright silk blouse, her hair styled meticulously, her smile stretched wide with self-importance. My son sat beside her, fidgeting with his watch, while the grandchildren played absently in the corner. I sat in my usual armchair, the same one I had occupied for decades. To an outsider, I might have looked like the frail matriarch, a silent observer waiting for others to decide her fate. But beneath my calm expression, my heart beat with steady resolve. They thought today would be their victory, but they were about to discover how wrong they were. My daughter-in-law cleared her throat dramatically. "Well," she began, "we all know Mother isn't getting any younger. It's time we start being practical. This house is far too much for her to handle alone, and managing the accounts must be overwhelming." She glanced at me briefly, her eyes cold but her lips curled in a patronizing smile. "We need to think about what's best for her and for the family." Her words dripped with false concern, but the message was clear. She already saw herself as the rightful heir. My son nodded in agreement, though he didn't meet my eyes. The room fell silent, as if awaiting my approval. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap and said evenly, "Before we discuss anything further, I've asked someone to join us." The front door opened, and in walked my lawyer, briefcase in hand. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. My daughter-in-law's confident smile faltered for the first time. My son looked confused. "Mother, what's this about?" he asked, his voice tinged with unease. My lawyer greeted the room politely before taking a seat. "I'm here at Mrs. Walker's request," he said, placing the briefcase on his knees. "She has asked me to read her updated will." A murmur rippled through the room. My daughter-in-law stiffened, her eyes narrowing. Updated will? She repeated, her voice sharp. Yes, I said softly, meeting her gaze. I felt it was time to make my intentions clear. The lawyer opened the folder, adjusting his glasses as he began to read. His voice was steady, almost clinical, but every word landed like thunder in that room. I, Margaret Walker, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare that upon my passing, all assets in my possession, including the family home, the bank accounts, the land holdings, and all other investments, shall be transferred in their entirety to the Children's Hope Foundation. The silence that followed was deafening. My grandchildren froze, sensing the tension though not fully understanding it. My son's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. My daughter-in-law sat rigid, her face draining of color. The lawyer continued, undeterred. This decision reflects my wish that the wealth accumulated by my late husband and myself should go toward improving the lives of children in need. It is my firm conviction that this is the best use of the resources entrusted to me during my lifetime. When he finished, he folded the papers neatly and looked toward me. The room remained frozen for a long, breathless moment. Then, like a dam breaking, the chaos began. My daughter-in-law shot to her feet, her voice trembling with outrage. This is ridiculous. You can't be serious. All of it? To strangers? Her eyes blazed as she pointed at me. After everything we've done for you, you would just give it away? I met her fury with calm. Everything you've done for me? I asked quietly. Tell me, what exactly have you done besides mock me, belittle me, and treat me as though I am already gone? My son stood abruptly, his face red. Mother, this isn't right. This house is part of our family. It should stay in the family. You can't just— I can, I interrupted firmly, my voice rising for the first time. It is mine to give. Every brick, every acre, every dollar. Your father and I built this with our own hands, our own sacrifices, and I will not see it wasted on greed. Seth. He faltered. His words caught in his throat. My daughter-in-law paced the room, clutching her hair in disbelief. You're condemning us to struggle, she screamed. Do you know how hard we've worked? How much we've planned? Her words stung with irony. They had planned their future on the assumption of my demise, spoken openly of how life would be easier once I was gone. And now, faced with the truth, their arrogance crumbled into desperation. My lawyer cleared his throat. I assure you, Mrs. Walker's decision is legally binding. The paperwork has been signed, witnessed, and filed. There is no contest here. My daughter-in-law turned on him, her voice shrill. You must have tricked her. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's old. She's confused. I straightened in my chair, my voice cutting through the chaos. Do I sound confused to you? The room went silent again. My words were sharp, deliberate, leaving no room for doubt. I know exactly what I'm doing. I am choosing to leave my legacy where it will do the most good. Not in your hands, where it would be squandered, but in the hands of those who truly need it. For once, my daughter-in-law had no retort. Her lips trembled as she sank back onto the couch, her eyes darting wildly as if searching for a way out of this nightmare. My son sat heavily beside her, his head in his hands. The weight of reality had finally settled on them. I looked around the room, at the faces that had once been my entire world. Now, they were strangers bound to me by blood but severed by greed. I felt no joy in their despair, but I did feel peace. For the first time in years, I held the power, and I had used it not for revenge alone but for justice. The grandchildren shifted uncomfortably, sensing the storm but not understanding its cause. I longed to comfort them, but I knew this was a lesson their parents had to face. The lawyer closed his briefcase and stood. That concludes the reading, he said simply. He nodded to me, then excused himself, leaving the rest of us in the thick silence that followed. No one spoke for several minutes. My daughter-in-law stared at the floor, her fists clenched. My son avoided my gaze, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Finally, I broke the silence. You may hate me for this, I said quietly, but one day you'll understand. Love is not measured by inheritance. It is measured by respect. And you gave me none. The words lingered in the air, heavy and final. For the first time, my daughter-in-law did not answer back. She simply sat there, her face pale, Her dreams of easy wealth shattered in an instant. And I, the old woman they once mocked, sat tall in my chair, my silence now a weapon, my dignity restored. The hours that followed the reading of my will felt like the unraveling of a storm. The silence that had settled in the living room did not last. Soon the air was thick with anger, disbelief, and desperate voices. My daughter-in-law was the first to break. She shot up from the couch, her face flushed red with fury. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You can't just give away everything we've built." I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Everything we've built?" My voice was calm, but sharp as glass. "You built nothing. Your hands have never known sacrifice. You came into this family expecting to reap what you never sowed." Her jaw clenched, but before she could reply, my son leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "Mother, please. Think this through. You're upset. That night at your birthday, you're letting one bad evening guide a decision that affects all of us." I looked at him steadily. "One bad evening?" I repeated softly. "Do you think this is about one night? This is about years of mockery, of disrespect, of being treated like an old relic. I have been patient. I have been silent, but no longer." He winced, his shoulders sagging. "We didn't mean it that way. You know how my wife jokes." "Enough," I said firmly. "Do not excuse cruelty by calling it humor. You laughed with her. You let her shame me in front of everyone. And that silence of yours, my son, hurt more than her words." For the first time, he looked away, unable to meet my eyes. My daughter-in-law scoffed loudly, pacing the room like a caged animal. "So what? You think giving everything to strangers is better? To some faceless charity? Better than giving it to ungrateful children," I answered, my voice unwavering. Her eyes burned with rage. "You're condemning your own blood to struggle while strangers benefit from what should rightfully be ours." The words made me laugh bitterly, though there was no joy in it. "Rightfully yours? What entitlement has poisoned you so deeply that you believe love is measured in property deeds and bank accounts? My husband and I worked every day of our lives to provide for this family, but respect was the only return I ever wanted. And when you failed to give even that, you forfeited the rest." The room fell quiet, save for her shallow, angry breaths. My son finally spoke again, softer this time, his voice heavy. "Mother, what about the children? Shouldn't they inherit something from their grandparents? They're innocent in all this." I softened slightly at the mention of my grandchildren, their wide, confused eyes peering from the corner. "I love them," I said gently. "And that is why I will not let them grow up believing greed is their birthright. They will learn the value of earning, of gratitude, of kindness. That lesson will serve them more than money ever could." My daughter-in-law let out a harsh laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're cruel. You want to teach lessons, but all you'll do is leave this family broken." I leaned forward, my voice quiet but searing. "It was broken long before this day. You made sure of that when you chose mockery over kindness, arrogance over humility. I am not the one who destroyed this family, you are." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. My son rubbed his temples, his frustration boiling beneath his skin. "Please," he said one last time, desperation creeping into his tone. "Just reconsider. Change the will back. We'll treat you better, I promise. Just don't do this." For a moment, I studied his face. I saw traces of the boy I once knew, the child who clung to me when thunder shook the windows, the young man whose smile had been my pride. My heart ached, but then I remembered the man who had sat silently at my birthday dinner while I was humiliated, who had allowed his wife's cruelty to drown out his conscience. And I knew it was too late. "I will not reconsider," I said firmly. "My decision is final. I have lived long enough to know that promises made in desperation are as fleeting as smoke. Respect cannot be begged into existence, it must be earned, and you have not earned it." The words seemed to slam into him like a physical blow. He sank back into the couch, defeated, his face buried in his hands. My daughter-in-law, however, continued to seethe, her eyes glistening with rage and unshed tears. "You'll regret this," she hissed finally, her voice trembling. "One day, you'll regret turning your back on your own family." I met her gaze steadily. "No," I said quietly. "The only regret I have is trusting that you would ever treat me with the respect I deserved. but regret ends today. From this moment forward, my life belongs to me and my legacy belongs to those who will honor it. The weight of my words settled heavily over the room. For once, neither of them had an answer. Their silence, born of defeat and disbelief, was all the confirmation I needed. The days after the will was revealed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. The house was heavy with silence, broken only by the sharp clatter of dishes or the slamming of doors as my daughter-in-law moved through the rooms like a storm. My son avoided me, barely speaking, his shame written in every hunched shoulder and downcast glance. But beyond those walls, the world seemed to hum with a different kind of energy. News of my decision spread quickly through our circle of neighbors and acquaintances. Whispers traveled down the street, and soon enough, people began stopping me on my morning walks. "Margaret, I heard what you did," Mrs. Harris from next door said, her eyes shining with admiration. "You're incredible. The Children's Hope Foundation is such a worthy cause. What a legacy to leave." Another neighbor chimed in. "Takes courage to stand up like that, especially against family. You've set an example for all of us." Their words warmed me in a way my family's approval never had. For years, I had been invisible in my own home, reduced to a nuisance. Now, people saw me again not as a burden, but as a woman with strength and conviction. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law couldn't step outside without feeling the sting of gossip. I overheard her on the phone, her voice sharp with panic. "They're all talking about me, calling me greedy, saying I pushed her into this. It's humiliating." I didn't bother correcting them. After all, wasn't it the truth? Her arrogance had been so loud, so careless, that the entire neighborhood had witnessed it. And now, the same community that once looked at her with respect, viewed her with contempt. One afternoon, I attended a small luncheon hosted by a local women's group. They applauded me as I entered, showering me with gratitude for my generosity. The director of the Children's Hope Foundation was there, too, a kind woman with gentle eyes. She spoke passionately about how the funds would build a new wing in their hospital, offering care for children with chronic illnesses. I felt a lump in my throat as I imagined the lives that would be touched. "You've given them hope, Mrs. Walker," she said, squeezing my hand. "Do you know how many children will sleep safely tonight because of you?" I blinked back tears, realizing then that my decision had reached far beyond revenge. It was not only a rebuke to those who mocked me, but also a gift of love to children I would never meet. That knowledge filled the hollow places in my heart that my family's betrayal had left behind. Back at home, however, the bitterness only deepened. My daughter-in-law lashed out at everyone, at the children, at my son, even at me. She accused me of ruining their future, of destroying everything they had worked for. But her fury rang hollow now. Every insult, every outburst, only revealed her desperation. My son grew quieter with each passing day. One evening, I found him standing in the kitchen, staring out the window. He turned when I entered, his face drawn and weary. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Then say nothing," I replied softly. "Just listen. You chose silence when your wife mocked me. Now you must live with the consequences of that silence." He lowered his head, shame coloring his cheeks. In that moment, I saw the boy he once was, the boy who had once adored me, but it was too late for sentiment. The damage was done. The final confrontation came at dinner a week later. My daughter-in-law, her voice trembling with rage, declared, "You've abandoned your family for strangers. You've chosen them over us." I set my fork down gently and looked her in the eye. "I chose respect," I said. "And when my own family could not give it, I gave my love and legacy to children who will. I chose a family worthy of the sacrifices I made." Her face crumbled, her bravado finally breaking. She pushed away from the table, tears spilling down her cheeks as she fled the room. My son sat frozen, his eyes fixed on his plate, too ashamed to follow her. I leaned back in my chair, the quiet settling around me. For years they had stolen my voice with their cruelty. But now I had spoken in the loudest way possible through action. My wealth, my life's work, would no longer be a pawn in their game. It was free of their grasp, placed where it could blossom into something beautiful. And for the first time in decades, I felt truly free. In the weeks that followed, the house grew colder, not in temperature but in spirit. My daughter-in-law moved through it like a ghost, bitter and resentful, while my son kept his head down, avoiding both confrontation and conversation. Meals were eaten in silence. The tension was a constant companion, pressing down on everyone. But for me, that silence was no longer painful. It was victory. I no longer felt small in my own home. Instead, I carried myself with a quiet strength that even their glares could not diminish. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the world go by, and smile to myself. They thought they had stripped me of everything, but the truth was the opposite. I had taken back what mattered most, my dignity. Outside the home, my days blossomed with new purpose. I spent time at the Children's Hope Foundation, visiting the hospital and meeting the staff. They showed me the plans for the new wing that would bear my name. Nurses hugged me, doctors thanked me, and children waved shyly from their beds. Their smiles were worth more than any inheritance could ever be. One little girl, no more than 8, pressed a crayon drawing into my hands. "Thank you," she whispered. It was a simple picture, 2 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun, but it brought tears to my eyes. That drawing meant more to me than all the polite thank yous my family had ever offered. For the first time in years, I felt truly needed. Neighbors continued to stop me on the street, offering kind words and admiration. Some even confessed that they wished they had the courage to do the same. "You taught us all something," one man told me. "Family isn't just about blood. It's about love, respect, and legacy." His words echoed the truth I had come to live by. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law could not escape the whispers. Friends drifted away, unwilling to align themselves with her greed. My son's colleagues gave him pitying looks at work, murmuring about how he had let things slip so far. They had once believed themselves untouchable, destined for comfort. Now, they were learning what it meant to stand on their own 2 feet. And though a part of me pitied them, I did not regret my choice. Pity was not the same as forgiveness. I could hope that one day they might grow, might learn humility. But that was their journey, not mine. My journey had taken a new path, one that filled my final years with meaning and peace. I found joy in simple things again, baking cookies for the children at the shelter, knitting blankets for newborns, reading bedtime stories aloud to little ones whose parents couldn't be there. My days were no longer filled with bitterness. They were filled with laughter, gratitude, and love, the kind of love that asked for nothing in return. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, I sat on the porch and thought about my husband. I imagined him beside me, smiling that proud smile of his. "You did the right thing," I could almost hear him say. "You honored what we built. You turned our sacrifices into hope." I closed my eyes and whispered into the twilight, "I hope you're proud of me." A gentle breeze brushed against my cheek, and in that moment, I believed he was. The family that once mocked me had fallen silent. Their laughter, which once wounded me, had been replaced by regret, and I, once invisible, had become stronger than they ever imagined. This was my revenge, silent and sweet. And now, to those listening, I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven their cruelty? Or would you have chosen, as I did, to give your legacy to those who would truly honor it? Share your thoughts, your stories, your truths. Because in the end, family is not defined by blood, but by the love and respect we give each other.